Right, now we've reached lesson 5 and we're going to be looking at aspects. The aspects, the basis for Gann's emblem. Now what is Gann's emblem? He wrote, within a circle is a square and a triangle. So here's our circle, the square and the triangle. Now as astrologers we know that that is the grand square that we've discussed and a grand trine. So you can understand why we need to understand the elements and the qualities, because this is a basis of the Gann emblem. And looking at planetary cycles, harmonics, timing your market, time cycles is all in relation to this one diagram. You can apply it in many ways. So let's have a look at what aspects are all about in a more detailed. Now, the word aspect comes from the Latin aspicere, I'm saying in Italian, which means to look at. It's the angular relationship between two planets or important points. Now, important points, I mean ascendant, midheaven. You know, they're not classified as planets, but they're important personal points. Thus, the planets' aspects were how they looked at each other, that is, either in a friendly or unfriendly manner. And you can just call it certain degrees of separation, more than 6. Okay, now here is a little snippet out of Gann's coffee letter, his aspects listed. Now this letter he wrote in 1954, which was a year before his death, and it was actually to a student where he lists all his sort of astrological methods. And here basically what he was doing was listing the heliocentric and geocentric aspects for a couple of months, or mainly the month of March and April, in relation to coffee. And you can see he's written here for the 24th of March, heliocentric Jupiter enters Cancer. That's called an ingress point when we move into a new sign, and Cancer is an ingress point. So a planet entering into a new sign is quite important. And again here he's got June 24, heliocentric Jupiter is 120, and that we're going to learn about these aspects, but that's essentially our trine, which is our grand trine of Saturn. So they're going to be Jupiter and Saturn trine heliocentrically. And then we've got the Sun 60 of Jupiter, which is a sextile, the Sun opposite, which is 180 of Neptune, Jupiter 135 of Saturn, which is a sesquiquadrat, Jupiter 60 again of sextile of Pluto, Jupiter 120 of Neptune, which is a trine, and the Sun opposite Saturn. Now he writes, the month of April is very important. There should be great activity and wide swings in price due to these aspects. So let's have a look at the chart, just so we can start seeing what these aspects look like. Basically, when we've got our astrological wheel, I mean, if you remember from the animation from lesson 1, when the wheel was turning, all these aspects were moving around as well. And on a daily basis, depending how the movement of the planets, they're going to be forming different aspects to one another. So Gann was looking at, one of them he was looking at was the Sun opposite Neptune. So that means they're 180 degrees apart, and also to Saturn, that was going to form an opposition. And there was a Jupiter trine Neptune, and a Jupiter sesquiquadrat Saturn. So you can see some of the aspects in there, and that's the whole aim of learning astrology, is to understand what these aspects are and how they can affect whatever you are studying. Everyone's going to be studying something different, but the technique is the same for everybody. You need different charts for whatever you're studying, but on a daily basis the energy overall can be looked upon by everybody. So aspects, I'm just going to go through them on this list, and then we're going to look at each one individually. So the conjunction, the symbol, this is another thing, part of the language of astrology is learning these symbols of the aspects. So you've got another thing to put stick up on the wall somewhere. So the conjunction, is a variable depending on the planets. Now this is conjunction, means when two planets are exactly at the same point in terms of longitude, and depending on what planets are involved will tell you if it's going to be easygoing or hard. Because imagine if Mars and Saturn come together, I mean they're known as the malefics, which mean, you know, the harder planets, the more difficult ones, and they're both difficult and they come together, so their conjunction will be quite difficult. So you've got to look at it like that. You have to sort of understand the energy of the planets and when they come into conjunction. The nice thing would be Venus and Jupiter coming together, because they're known as the benefics, so they're the beneficial planets, and they're going to help you. Coming together is a beautiful aspect. Okay, so a semi-sextile looks like under a table. The other upside down table is a semi-sextile, and that's a positive link and subtle developments. Then we have a semi-square, which looks like a sort of an L, or actually looks like a carpenter square. A semi-square, irritation generates action, and that's 45 degrees. This is 30, sorry, we'll get into the degrees in a minute. The sextile just looks like a Star of David. Sextile, expansive opportunity, and it's a 60 degrees. Quintile looks like a Q. Quintile, spiritual and creative potential, that's 72 degrees. Square is basically just a box or a square, and that's 90 degrees, and it's challenges, tests and obstacles. The trine, again our trine is a pyramid, very positive, 120 degrees. Trine, harmony, benefits and gifts. Sesquiquadrate is the square of the 90, and that little L is the L from the semi-square. When you add 90 and 45 you get 135, so the sesquiquadrate is 135 degrees, and this causes unexpected developments. The inconjunct is a table, and it's 150 degrees, and it's a difficult blend, and you can have health issues under that transits of that sort of planets. And the opposition basically looks like a seesaw, two people on each end, and it's 180 degrees, and its opposing force is to be balanced and compromise. So we're going to look at them individually now. So here is our conjunction, and our symbol is a little circle with a stick hanging out, looks like a tennis racket or a bat, and here we have it's 360 degrees, meaning that they're exactly the same point in longitude. Now this is called the first harmonic, so we're talking about a circle of 360 degrees, and anytime you start dividing it, that's termed as a harmonic. Astrologers can use that word harmonic, but also we look at them as aspects, but there are different ways of dividing the circle. And in more advanced classes or intermediate, we actually get into harmonics, because I'm a cosmobiologist. That's what we tend to do. We start dividing the charts up quite dramatically, and you know, it changes the way to look at a 360 wheel. Can't get into it right now until we get the basics, but it gets quite exciting once you start looking at a wheel, a 90-degree wheel. So let's start with this. So this is a first harmonic, which is 360 degrees, and again it's a variable energy depending on the planets, but overall the blending is an intense aspect, so it emphasizes those two planets coming together. And basically I'm looking at what that may mean. What I've done is actually put Mars and Saturn together when they come conjunct, and it's pretty much a 24 months apart. So you can see every time they've formed a conjunction, these are the sort of things, the reactions that have happened. And so you'll find that once you start plotting them, this is on a monthly basis, because I just wanted to see the 24 months apart. On your charts, you'll start finding some aspects that actually can show you quite significant cycles in whatever you're studying, and everything's going to have a different rhythm or vibration, if you want to use Gann's term, and it's really up to you discovering what it is. Now if you've got something that you study quite intensely, you probably know its rhythm quite well anyway, so plotting some of these aspects on it, you might find that it's every time two planets come together that you get a turn in your market. So it's very exciting research and very exciting way to enhance your trading. Now this is a semi-sextile, so when we divide the circle by 12, we get 30 points, 30 degrees, which is basically our zodiac sign. So it's a 30 degrees, which is a semi-sextile, and it looks like an upside down table. So this aspect is known to have a positive link, learning, growth, and subtle development. So it's still a positive, but not a strong positive, a learning potential. Now, the vertical lines here show the Sun semi-sextile Jupiter, and this is on a weekly chart, and it's 56 weeks apart. So you can see these sort of little areas here. Now, this is a nice one here. Now we're going to have another one here. Now, I think I mentioned before, we get these funny doubling ups because there's a movement in planets called retrograde movement, and they come back and forth, and so you'll get these sort of patterns that causes an irregularity in the cycle. So even though we've got 56 weeks apart, we've got this little panel here where they do a funny little it's called a retrograde direct and station, but we'll get into that in other classes. So here we get to the next one, the 8th harmonic, which is my favorite, because this is what we use, cosmobiologists use mainly this harmonic, and it's a 45 degree, and this is where Gan comes in, is 45 degrees angles, and also 45 years in Wall Street. So there's a big connection with the 8th harmonic in Gan, and also his square of 9. So the symbol looks like, oh sorry, my cursor looks like that half a sort of a leggy, it looks like a carpenter square really, and it's a semi-square. Now this is classified as a difficult aspect, irritation that generates action. So you know, we know things happen every 45 days, for example. Well, let's have a look at, I've actually plotted these lines in the Sun semi-square Venus, and these are 24 weeks apart. So again, you can see a nice pattern in here, and so this is part of the exploration of understanding these aspects, and that's why having the basics can help you. Again, I'm sort of repeating myself, but that's the whole aim of getting a feel for these harmonics or these aspects, and what it means in terms of planetary alignments for your markets. Now we get to the 6th harmonic, which is the sextile, and that gives you 60 degrees, and this is where we get the word hex from, and sex, and it means 6, and there's our Star of David as well. So the 6th harmonic is actually an expansive opportunity. It's a nice energy, and we like that energy. So think of, I won't tell you what to think. If you forget that one, just remember 6. And that's, remember Gan had a hexagram, a hex chart that he was using on this vibration of the sextile. Now, Mars sextile Uranus is a 72 weeks apart cycle, so this is quite a long cycle. And just to give you an indication, because they're known as sort of action and volatile planets, so it's interesting to see if they do have an impact on the market, and you can see for yourself. Now we come to the 5th harmonic, which is the quintile. Now when we divide the circle by 5, we get 72 segments of 5, 72 degrees, and this is again very important because it's to do with the pentagram or the pentagon, and it has to do a lot with the Fibonacci numbers and the golden mean ratio. So 72 is crucial in trading, and also people use a 72 and 144 days like Gan teaches. So it's a harmonic of this 5th harmonic, and it's to do with spiritual and creative potential. So here we have a chart of Mars, quintile, Saturn, and it's exactly 45 weeks apart. Now these numbers, I love them because they're very much Gan. So we've got a 72 degrees separation between two planets, and it's giving us 45 weeks apart. So that's pretty magical. This is the one to come in the future soon. So, you know, things like this, when you start seeing these numbers, it gets quite exciting in your research, and you're reading Gan at the same time, and you're going to put two things together, and it gets very exciting. So the next one is the 4th harmonic, which when we divide a circle by 4 we get 90 degrees, and these are our seasons, our quarters, and this is called a square, and that's basically is a square. Now think of, when you get lost sometimes with these aspects, think of the square, it is a box, and you know, if you're put in a box, how restricted that will feel, and basically that is essentially the energy that it does, it restricts you. So the square is very challenging, and there's tests, obstacles, and karmic lessons. So you know, when they come along, and if you're having it as a natal thing, what I mean is that there might be a time when a planet comes in and causes a 90-degree aspect to maybe your sun or your moon. Well, it's going to challenge you and your emotions. Whatever planet it is will impact on you, and you know, it's good to know those times because they can help you actually understand. You know, sometimes you need, if you've got sort of an understanding of why am I feeling like this, and they say, okay, well, it's only going to last for this week and I'll be okay. And that's the thing about astrology, can give you that confidence that, okay, there will be light at the end of the tunnel. So it's very empowering to have that, and you know, you just accept that, okay, well, what am I supposed to be learning this week? You know, why the obstacles? What do I need to learn about myself? And that's it. You know, it can be difficult, but it's all to do with growth. So here we have Venus square Uranus, and it's 16 weeks apart. This is a very neat, nice cycle. I like this one. Looks really good. So as an interesting one, because they are known, Venus is the planet of money, Uranus is the one of change and volatility, and the square is a challenging aspect. So it's interesting to see this cycle. I really like it. Here we get to the third harmonic. Basically we are dividing a circle by 3, and we get 3 segments of 120 degrees, and this is our magic trine, which looks like a pyramid. If you get lost, you look at it and remember you're reaching the heavens. It's very positive. So that's the green part of the Gans emblem, and again it's very positive, harmonious, benefits, ease of progress, blessings and gifts. Everyone wants a trine in their chart, and everyone wants a trine to form in the heavens because it's just flowing energy and you feel good. So it's very nice. So let's have a look here. The Sun trine Mars I've plotted here, and they're 60 weeks apart. So that's another nice cycle. This is quite big cycles. So there's some of these are obviously going to take a lot longer to form. Depends on what you're analysing. I mean, if you're trying to analyse, you know, if you're a short-term trader, you don't want to sort of, you might not be interested in 60 weeks apart. So this aspect's not going to work for you. So, you know, I have to think of how you're trading before you start. What planets are you going to use? I mean, if you want to use long-term cycles and you're interested in investing for, you know, 2 or 3 years, well, then you'll be looking at outer planets. But if it's a short-term thing, you're going to be looking at the planets that have shorter cycles, because they're going to form aspects more quickly. You've got to understand that. Whereas the outer planets, they take longer to form aspects because they move a lot more slowly every day before they form an aspect with another planet. Okay. So now we get to sesquiquadrate, and it's not an even division of the circle, so I haven't put it in, but if you like decimals you can. So here we get the sesquiquadrate, which I told you before was actually, the symbol is a square, which is the 90 degrees plus the little L from the 45, and so you get the 135. And this is known to cause unexpected developments, breakup of existing conditions. So it's still on the harmonic of 45. So you notice that on the circles, what I tend to do, and I keep with the traditional colours, is that the negative aspects I keep in red, to, you know, like the traffic lights, like I've explained before, or I'm going to explain soon. And the blues I tend to keep for the positive aspects. It's or the greens, sometimes they use either blue or green for positive on astrological charts that are printed in colour. Okay, so red's technically the one that you just have a look at. The more aspects you see in red, the more difficult it's going to be. Okay, so these vertical lines show Mars 135 Jupiter, which is a sesquiquadrate, and they're 49 weeks apart. Now, I like that 49 weeks. That scans 7 times 7 in the Jubilee, and you know, it's an interesting number. So that's a cycle there. Looks pretty good. Okay, but still, this is more 49 weeks. It's almost a year. So, and this is another one in conjunct that doesn't divide evenly, and it's 150 degrees, and it looks like a table. And this is a difficult blend and adjustment. So you'll see these 150s come up a lot, and some astrologers don't use the 150. They tend to stay just with the standard Ptolemaic aspects. But I do use a 150 because it's has to do with 10 times 15, and that's an important 15 degrees is important when you're doing Gann analysis as well. So let's look at this one. This is Jupiter 150 Neptune, so these are going to be long-term cycles. That's 114 weeks apart. Okay, now that can be divided up too as well. You get harmonics of these cycles, but I'm just showing you how you can plot these on your chart. Okay, and the last one we're doing is a second harmonic, which is the opposition, basically dividing the circle into half, and the symbol looks like a seesaw. So you've got two people on each side, and it's just basically across the dial. It's two planets across the dial. So here we have opposing forces to be balanced. It's compromise and cooperation. So it's the opposition is actually not as difficult as a square, because with the opposition you've always got you can actually create balance and compromise, but the square, it's like a box. You know, you find it difficult to sort of stretch your arms and try to do something with it. So, you know, just think of it that way. If you experience an opposition, you're going to think, okay, well, how can I make the best out of this situation? Now, the Sun. This is to do with the Sun opposite Uranus, and it's basically 12 months. It's just a cycle of the Sun coming back to Uranus, and this is a very nice one too. You can see it, you know, but that's just a yearly cycle. But it's giving you a timing for it though. Okay, let's review the aspects now. Let's have a look. Conjunction is 0 degrees, and it's a variable depending on the planets. Semi-sextile is 30 degrees, and it's a positive link and subtle developments. Semi-square is 45 degrees, irritation generates action. Sextile is 60 degrees, expansive opportunity. The quintile is 72 degrees, spiritual and creative potential. The square is a 90 degrees and challenges, tests and obstacles. The trine is 120 degrees, harmony, benefits and gifts. The sesquiquadrate is 135, it's unexpected developments. The inconjunct is 150, it's a difficult blend, health issues. The opposition is 180 degrees, so it's opposing forces to be balanced. Okay, now let's have a look at what these aspects mean with this little animation I've made. Now, the two little yellow circles are pretending two planets are there, and this is our astrological wheel, and we know that there are 12 houses in the wheel. So anytime we have an opposition, it's 6 houses or signs away from each other. So the opposition is 6 times 3 or 30, we get 180. So you can see our opposition, we've got 2 points opposite one another. Then we have the 150 or the inconjunct, and now we've got 5 houses. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So those 2 planets are 5 houses or 5 signs apart. Okay. Now we go to the next aspect is a trine. Trine 120, and it's actually 4 houses or 4 signs apart. So we get 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 times 30 is 120. Next one, we get a square, and that is 3 houses or signs apart. 1, 2, 3, and that's the sign of our square, and that's our square, and that is 90 degrees. Sextile is 60, and remember it looks like a star, and when it's 2 houses apart, 1, 2, and that's our sextile. Semi-square is 1.5 signs apart or houses apart, and that's our sign. It looks like a carpenter's square, and it's 45 degrees. And then we have just one sign apart, they're next to each other, which is 30 degrees, and it looks like an upside down table, and it's called a semi-sextile. And the last one is the conjunction, when they're exactly together. So you can see that again, and it's 0 degrees. Now we're going to actually look at some aspects in a natal chart and what we would do with it, and understanding all these alignments in here, which is basically what we've been going through individually. And this is W.D. Gann's chart. So let's have a look at what another aspect of an aspect is this aspect grid. Now, when you get your natal chart, you usually get this grid on it as well. You should on the sheet. So if you get a little bit confused looking at what's going on in here and understanding the relationship between the planets, this actually lists it for you. So let's have a look at how it works. We've got planets going along here on a diagonal, and we've got them coming down vertically here. So we've got to start with the moon. Okay, so it's usually the faster moving planets coming down first. So we want to know our first planet is the moon, and we want to find out what aspects the moon is making in Gann's chart. So we look with our eyes, we go down the moon column. So let's have a look at what we see. Now, when it interacts with the sun, there's no aspect in this little box. There's nothing in there, so they are not forming an aspect in his chart. But we go down to the next planet, and you can see in the box there's a square, and so that means that the moon is square Mercury, and we write that with our symbols. So we've got the moon, our square, and our symbol for Mercury. So this is the language, these are the symbols that you're slowly going to get used to seeing, where you immediately know what that means. You've got two planets forming a square. Okay, so then we keep going, and we notice that the moon coming down the next little section to Venus is actually trine. So we write the moon trine Venus, and remember the trine is 120 degrees. That's a nice aspect to have in your chart. Now remember, the moon has to do with emotions, and Venus is love and affection, and we've got this nice trine. So obviously that's a nice energy for Gann in terms of his emotional sides and his love, and expressing that side of his personality. Now let's keep going down the column, and we see there's nothing for Mars, no aspect between the moon and Mars, no aspect between the moon and Jupiter, no aspect with Saturn, but there is with Uranus, and it's a conjunction. So we write the moon conjunct Uranus. Now this can make it quite volatile. Remember, when we use a conjunction, we have to think about the actual essence of the planet. And so the moon is emotion, and Uranus causes unexpected change, very changeable, radical, so it can be unsettling to the emotions. So, you know, either Gann had issues with his mum, or a lot of changeability around his home when he was young, and also emotionally he would have a lot of ups and downs, and changeable his attitude, and maybe even his relationship with women, because the moon has always got to do with women in a man's life. Okay, so let's keep going down the column, and there's nothing to Neptune, but there's a square to Pluto, and so we get the moon square Pluto. Okay, so I think you're getting an understanding of this aspect grid. I'm not going to go through each one of them because it gets a little bit boring. So basically we go down the Sun column, the Mercury column, the Venus, Mars, right down to them, and we've got an understanding of what that means. Now what I get my students to do, and you might want to do it, if you've actually wanted a copy of your chart and you asked me for it with our other lessons, you can actually, I'm going to give it to you with this grid on it, And what you can do is go through your grid and just circle all the negative aspects and with red, so that is sort of highlighted, and the positive ones either blue or green, so you get an understanding of what is actually in your natal chart. I mean, the part of learning about yourself first is a really important aspect, another aspect, I love that word, of understanding yourself first. When it comes to learning astrology, everyone wants to sort of understand what they're all on about themselves, and then you can start looking at, you know, your family, your children, and then that gives you confidence when you want to start looking at stocks and so forth. But understanding, knowing yourself first is, I believe, very, very important when it comes to astrology. So now these are the aspects actually looking now. We can see that the moon trine Venus, so you've got Venus here, and because they're trine, they're going to be 120 degrees apart, which is 4 signs. Okay, now here is the moon square Mercury and Pluto. You can see the squares in there. See how they're all red? This is what I want you to notice first in your charts, and try to get your printouts in color, because usually they stick with those colors. And the moon conjunct Uranus, basically right on his ascendant. Remember, our ascendant is here, and he's got it right there. So you can start getting a feel for these aspects in your chart. Now, when we're looking at aspects, we need to understand what orb means. Now, orb is a degree of allowance given to an aspect formation. Now, in Gann's example, the moon has a 6-degree orb to forming a trine to Venus. The aspect reaches exact culmination when the separation is exactly 120 degrees. So his moon is actually at 26 Leo, and his Venus is at 2 Taurus. Therefore, the moon, being the faster moving planet forming the aspect, still has 6 degrees before it would have formed an exact trine to Venus. For example, it would need to have been at 2 Virgo to have been exactly 120 degrees apart. Now remember, planets in the same element always form a trine. Taurus and Virgo are both earth signs. So let's go back. I'm just going to go back to Gann's chart so I can explain that better. Can you see here we've got Venus trine the moon? Okay. Now when a planet is forming an aspect, well, we'll get into the pline and separating, it's always that we're looking at the faster moving planet making an aspect to the slower moving planet. Okay, so since the moon is faster, it's the one that's making an aspect, and it's moving into forming this exact trine. So at the moment, Venus is at 2 Taurus, and his moon was at 26 Leo. So it's still got another 6 degrees to get into Virgo before it'd be exactly 120 degrees. So that's what is called orb. So in essence, that is still a 6 degree of separation, which is allowable. Now there's lots of different astrologers use different aspects. I tend to, with the moon, you can use it slightly wider because it moves faster, but I tend to stick to 5 for everything, which means I give 5 on either side, and we'll talk about it in a minute, applying and separating from the actual culmination. So let's have a look. We'll go to the next slide. Is applying and separating aspects. So in the aspect grid, you'll either see a letter A or S in the box under the aspect and the exact degree of allowance. So A equals applying, and that is the faster moving planet is moving towards forming the aspect. S equals separating, that is the faster moving planet has moved beyond the exact aspect and separating. Now the easiest way to think of this is like a bell curve, and you have standard deviation on either side, but you've got the point of culmination at the peak of the curve. Okay, so an applying aspect is said to be stronger than a separating one, and its strength is said to be its greatest immediately just before it becomes exact. So I like to look at, in people's charts, I always tend to look at the applying aspects. The separating ones, they say, are already sort of happened, and on a soul level you've sort of worked them all out, and it's the applying ones that are forming, and as you sort of thinking of more advanced techniques of progressions and solar arcs, they're the ones that we're looking at, the applying aspects, more than the separating ones. So let's have a look at what all this means. These are applying aspects. So we've got the moon and we've got Venus, and see how it's got 6A 13. So what it's telling you, it's got 6 degrees before it forms, applying before it forms an exact trine. So the faster moving planet moves, the moon has got another 6 degrees before it forms, applying a trine to Venus. Okay, so that is an applying aspect. Now we've got Venus to Jupiter, and that's an applying square, so it's got 4A02. So Venus still has 4 degrees before it forms an exact square to Jupiter. Now remember, Venus is faster moving than Jupiter, so see, these ones on the diagonal are always the ones that are actually forming the aspect to the slower ones on this side. Okay, so the opposite is a separating, so they've actually passed, the faster moving planet has gone beyond the culmination and moving away from it. So let's have a look at some examples of this. One is here, we've got Mercury 2s26. That means it's 2 degrees past separating from a sextile to Mars, sextile being 60 degrees, so it's actually 62, you add it on. Now Jupiter is square 1s separating, 1 degree separating 43 away from its exact square to a Neptune, so it's actually 91 degrees 0.43 minutes separation, if you understand what I mean. I hope you do. So this grid can be a way that you can actually study on a daily basis what sort of aspects there are in the heavens. So part of learning how to start forecasting is actually having one of these grids, or you can get an ephemeris that actually lists these aspects. Now I will, if you want to join my mailing list on my website, I'll actually be giving you a free weekly report of what aspects are happening, and you can keep track of it if you don't have access to it. So it's just a way of learning, and every day maybe you can just keep a little tally in your diary or your trading diary of what's happening, and watch the market and start seeing what aspects are happening and what planets are involved, and what happens with the market on those days. And it's just then through your own observation you're going to start understanding what planet might be the one that's giving you the most indication of what to expect in the future. So it is just not trial and error, but it's observation. And because everyone's looking at something different, it's very hard to be general and say, yes, every time these two planets come together, that's going to affect your whatever, the market. You can't be so general. The people study this intensely, and they will find something for their particular market that will give them changes in trends and timing events. So really it comes up to the individual how you apply this information, but the technique is the same basics